Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from. It's 3 p.m. here in the UK and 10 a.m. Eastern time, and you're most welcome to join us here at Zero Days Live. Now, if you're returning from our show yesterday, welcome back. And if this is your very first time today, then great to have you here too. My name's Stuart Reed, and I'm with Nominet, focused on cyber solutions. And given the dynamic nature of cyber and the even more dynamic situation we're facing right now, we thought we'd try something new. Now, we recognize that a lot of people are perhaps feeling slightly disconnected from one another, especially with the usual conferences, events, and face-to-face meetings being paused right now. So we thought here at Nominet Cyber that it'd be a great opportunity to do something a little bit different and create a webcast that is open for all within or with an interest in cybersecurity. Now, what we're aiming to do with the show is to provide an opportunity to hear from others in the industry, get a round of what's going on in the news, share some thoughts on best practice as we navigate our way through what is and continues to be a changing world right now. But most importantly, we want your involvement too, be that interactive polls, questions, comments, or anything else that you'd like to discuss, within reason, of course. During today's show or any of the other live shows, you'll notice that on your screen you have the ability to ask questions or to provide comments. So please do use that and we can review those and read them out during the course of the live shows. Now, for those of you that joined yesterday, you'll already be aware that we're keeping a fairly authentic look and feel to what's going on here. As I mentioned before, we do go out live with each of these episodes. There are no pre-records unless you're catching us on demand. So what you'll notice today, again, behind me is my home office, which now doubles up as one of the virtual studios for 0 Days Live. Just a quick reminder, again, we're running these webcasts every weekday live between now and June. So that's going to be at least 40 live episodes on 40 downloads on demand that will be available. And because we are running here live, anything could happen, and I'm sure anything will happen. So it all adds to the unique and authentic look of the show and the experience. So please do embrace that as we will be. We plan to run for about 20 or 30 minutes a day, but there's no hard and fast rules. And if you're not able to join us for the whole live show or indeed for any of the live shows, then you can catch us on demand. So please see nominetcyber.com/0 Days Live, which is the same page that you signed up from. So it really couldn't be easier. Now, as I said before, and yesterday, it's not just me. We've got lots of great content. We've got some fantastic guests, and not to mention a great team supporting us both behind the scenes and joining me live. And I'll do some intros in a moment. But the most important thing is that this show would not be the same without the participation and without you guys tuning in with us as well. So with that in mind, if there is something that you want to hear more about or less about, then just let us know. And again, use that console on the right-hand side of your screen to be able to give us that feedback. Now, for those of you that joined yesterday, or even for those of you who didn't, yesterday we were lucky enough in our launch show to be joined by both Donna Leslie, Head of HR at Clarabridge, and Jenny Moore from Nominet, both senior HR professionals. And we spoke to them about the overall well-being and how to ensure that we all stay safe, both mentally, but also online as well. And we also spoke to our very own Steve Forbes, who I'll do another introduction for in a moment. But for me, one of the big takeaways from that discussion yesterday was certainly to remember to communicate. We can't, for the most part right now, do it in the ways that we're all perhaps used to at the moment. But it's still important that we do find ways to stay in touch. And if nothing else, the current situation that we're all faced with right now shows that there are all sorts of ways technology can help us do that. That communication also applies to spotting something suspicious or indeed malicious online, or indeed if you accidentally click something by accident. Make sure you do inform your security teams as soon as possible if that happens. And I guess the final thing from me from yesterday's discussion was to remember that we really are all in this together right now. So making sure that we support each other is really vital. And that's what we're trying to do here with 0 Days Live. In our small contribution, we're looking to provide an outlet for everyone to get involved. So please do so. The focus of our show is all things cyber, but what we want to ensure is that we keep a good balance of information, discussion, and some good humor as well. Now, as I mentioned yesterday, we have a different theme every day of the week. Today's theme is Tech Tuesday. So a quick reminder of everything that's going on through the week. Yesterday was Industry Insights. Tomorrow is Security Begins Here. We then have GovSec on Thursday, and then we have something pretty light-hearted on a Friday, reflecting on the rest of the week's news and activities. But today is Tech Tuesday, and today we will be talking to our very own Steve Forbes in a moment about the domain name system, or commonly referred to as DNS, and how that this ubiquitous protocol that underpins everything that we do can provide an essential layer of cybersecurity. Now, before we get into today's discussion, for those of you that joined yesterday, you will remember that I kicked things off with my pet peeve from the last week or so. So just a reminder or an introduction to that for people that weren't able to join us yesterday. My pet peeve is definitely having to still get up at least the same time in the morning, if not earlier. So even though I'm now firmly working from home, like a lot of people are, and so don't have to worry about that commute, I do have two young children who do think that they are on an extended holiday right now, and therefore they are getting up much earlier than before. The bright side, of course, is that the clocks have changed, so the mornings are definitely getting a bit lighter and brighter. We want to hear your pet peeves too. I'm sure there's going to be a variety of those that come through, so please do share those with us, and we'll read those out during the course of the shows that we put on here at ZeroDaysLive. Kerry will be monitoring all of those and reading those out for us. And speaking of Kerry, introduce yourself once again for us, Kerry, and also remind us, what was your pet peeve?
Hi, Stuart. So hi, I'm Kerry. Nice to see you all. My pet peeve yesterday was actually the days starting to blend a little bit too much into one. But I've had a rethink overnight, and I have a new pet peeve today. And it's actually about the new online apps that seem to be, well, it seems to be our social life now. So things like Facebook Messenger and House Party. Now, all of them seem to have a cap on the free versions at 8 people. And that is my pet peeve. How can I deliver a pub quiz to a group of friends that's limited at 8 people?
Well, thank you for that, Kerry. I guess my response to that might be that perhaps you pay for some of the content, but I'll leave that for you and the app creators to discuss amongst yourselves. So thank you for that, Kerry. Let's move on to today's discussion. Now, as the title suggests, Tech Tuesday is all about the technical aspects of cyber. But before I introduce Steve again, here's a quick video to neatly show what the DNS is all about.
DNS, or Domain Name System, is critical to the operation of the Internet. To navigate the web, your computer needs to know the IP address of the website you're looking to visit. But the human brain isn't wired to easily remember long strings of numbers like IP addresses. This is where the DNS comes in. DNS works like a telephone directory, mapping website names like www.example.com into IP addresses. This process occurs in a series of iterative steps. A DNS query will be issued to your local resolver when you request to go to a website. The local resolver will begin by contacting the root server, which returns the address of the name server responsible, in this case for the .com zone. A query is then made to the .com TLD server, which will respond with the location of the authoritative name server responsible, here example.com. Finally, the authoritative name server will be contacted and will return the IP address for the domain requested. These steps are carried out in a matter of milliseconds, in which the querying host will receive the IP address associated with www.example.com. The web server at that IP address can now be contacted, and the web content retrieved. DNS is critical to network function, so needs to always be on and working in the background. Despite this, the DNS is often overlooked by many security solutions, even whitelisted by most firewalls, creating an open backdoor for cyber criminals, who can use DNS to carry out a range of attacks, including phishing, malware, and data exfiltration. In fact, most cyber threats rely on the DNS to operate, so securing this open backdoor is critical.
Okay, excellent. Well, I'm sure you'll agree that that's quite an interesting snippet and snapshot of what the domain name system is all about, or DNS. What I'd like to do now is welcome Steve Forbes back to the studio so that we can learn a little bit more about it. So hi there, Steve. How are you doing today?
Hello, I'm good, thank you. Yourself?
Excellent, very good. Thank you very much. What I'd like to do is start with the really important questions of the day. You've heard, again, my pet peeve from earlier on, brand new one today from Kerry. Remind everyone what your pet peeve is.
Yeah, firstly, I'd just like to say I'd like to have Kerry's problem of having more than 8 people to talk to on a call. That'd be a good position to be in, so count yourself lucky, Kerry. My pet peeve yesterday, and I'm carrying on the theme today, is on-demand telly. So having paid out for the Disney Plus app, only to find that Frozen 2 is not on there. You've got to pay extra for Frozen 2, and then you watch it and you find it wasn't as good as the first one anyway. So you're better off just watching the first one over and over again. But perhaps I should let it go. And then this morning, Netflix has decided that we've obviously watched all of the content in our household, and therefore it's recommending Christmas films. I think it's a little bit early for that, and surely there must be more content on there than Christmas films for us to watch.
So I have to disagree with you, actually, Steve. I think every day should be Christmas Day. So I'm very much looking forward to binge watching the Home Alone again after this show today. Enough of that, though. So thank you for that pet peeve. Again, if that sparked or if anyone can resonate with those pet peeves, or indeed that sparked one of your own, please do again get in touch with us. Let us know. We'll read those out during the course of the show. But again, let's focus on what today's real subject is, and that's really to learn a little bit more around DNS and what it's all about. So that video snapshot that we had just then was a kind of a handy reminder or refresher of what DNS is all about. And I guess that a lot of the audience that we've got here today, live with us or on demand, will be somewhat familiar with the domain name system or DNS. But help us understand, Steve, why is it so important?
Well, as we saw in the video, it's crucial to how the internet works and ensures that we as general users of the internet don't need to remember IP addresses. Imagine having to remember all the different IP addresses of all the different websites you want to visit, and instead you just need to remember something like nominetcyber.com as an example. So it's pretty important in terms of the way that we use the internet. It's been there since the invention of the internet, and it hasn't really changed since that time either. It's still the same system that ensures that we can type a website into our browser and within milliseconds get an answer and the content that we want to access. Now, obviously, between putting that website into your browser and getting that response, an awful lot has to happen in terms of the architecture and the infrastructure behind that to enable that DNS query to go through the different servers to get that answer back. And that's really kind of what's really important, is to think about those different layers of that service in between you putting in that website into your browser, and how that can both give you an awful lot of data in terms of what's happening on your network, but also the opportunities for perhaps an attacker to take advantage of that and use that infrastructure to cause some kind of malicious intent on your network.
So I guess that's an interesting point, though, Steve, because right now there is no shortage of cyber solutions or vendors that are bringing together cyber solutions that are able to kind of tackle all sorts of different areas of the cyber stack. So what is it that's special about DNS in terms of the value it can provide from a cyber perspective over and above anything else that's available out there?
Well, the first thing is it's as you mentioned earlier, it's ubiquitous. So every internet-facing device on your network is going to be using DNS. So there's no missing anything here. Everything's going to be communicating with the internet, and therefore it's going to be using DNS. So if you're reviewing your DNS logs, then you'll be able to see every single piece of activity that's going on in terms of internet queries. So every device is going to be covered. You get complete coverage. You can see everything that's going on. Now, one of the challenges, obviously, that we've faced in the past is that is an awful lot of data. and therefore trawling through all those logs is incredibly difficult. But advances in research and data science and things like machine learning means that actually you can really harness that big data and get some really good information from there, really getting down to the detail of what's important, what's not important, and surfacing that information that you really care about. Now, obviously, previously we'd have thought of lots and lots of data as a bit of a barrier and would have made it really difficult to go through. But actually, we're in a world with machine learning now where the more data you have, the better your solution can become, and the better your machine learning solutions become as well. So actually, lots and lots of data means you get better algorithms, you get better machine learning, which means you can respond in an even more effective way to some of these attacks. I think the other thing as well is that traditional solutions have always focused on the known security threats, so known indicators of compromise. Traditional antivirus solutions have always relied on signatures, or firewalls have relied on known domains, to block an IP address and things like that. When we start to look at DNS, you can start to look at the behavior of domains as well as known indicators of compromise. So you're starting to look at the unknown as well. Now, when you look at how domains act and how they're made up, if you've got the experience that a company like Nominet has in domains, back from our domain registry side, then you can start to understand what a bad domain looks like, how it starts out, what's the life of that domain, and you can then put blocks in place before that even becomes a problem. So you're recognizing what's going to turn into a bad domain before it even gets there. So you can actually, interpret that and identify when something might cause you harm. Yeah, I mean that's the key thing, really. I think is that it's taken a step into protecting against the unknown as well as the known. That's one of the key areas here.
And I guess also, just to add to that, the holistic nature of DNS, as we've already mentioned, is ubiquitous in its nature. It's used by all networks to communicate with one another. So the the qualities that it has, from a holistic standpoint at least, is also quite valuable, especially when you start thinking about people's network perimeters starting to bleed into different forms. So it's not just about the four walls perimeters on your own estate. It's looking at cloud security, it's looking at multi-sites, it's looking at hybrid approaches. So I guess there's also the value from the holistic perspective. It's interesting that it can provide a value in terms of a layered approach as well, I suppose, to the security stack. And with that in mind, what is the level of security information that you can see? So we spoke a little bit about the the big data and the amount of information that you can see in there, but what does that really translate to in terms of the type of threats or the type of malware? What is it you can actually spot within the DNS layer from a cyber perspective?
Yeah, I mean, so there's some key insights that DNS can provide you. I think we've got a slide just on some of the top things here that I'll talk through. Okay, so first of all, malware. So long gone are the days where a piece of malware was fire and forget, where someone would send you an attachment, you'd have some kind of file on it that you'd open, and then it would do something to your system, and that was it, and then you'd have to try and remove it and remediate from there. Now malware is looking for persistency, really. So whether that be because it's the malware is a first payload, and then they'll be looking for an additional payload after that. If you look at something like Imitet and TrickBot, they're normally the initial stages of an infection, and it's malware that will then call out to get a secondary or even a third stage of infection to try and download some additional malware to get to the end goal, really. And secondly to that, it may be that the attacker is trying to gain some kind of persistency through the network as well. So they want to gain persistent access to the network, perhaps getting into one single endpoint to start with, and then trying to move laterally across the network. So there's always a need for that device to be able to call back to a command and control server, for example, either to get an additional payload or to maintain that persistency of control from the attacker. So DNS provides you with that information in terms of where that device is calling out to, and you can start to see if it's calling out to both known domains that could indicate that your device has been compromised, or potentially new domains that have just popped up. And we've got, as we see there, new domains as well, where new domains have been registered for malicious purposes. And you can see if a new domain is popped out one day, it's very unlikely that a brand new website with genuine content and a need on there is going to be generated within a day. It's going to take weeks, if not months, to create a domain that is actually of use to someone. So often these new domains are used for malicious purposes, and we can track that to identify when they could be malicious. The other area is around phishing as well. So clearly there is a link between phishing and new domains as well. A lot of the new domains that we see that have been created for the purposes of phishing content, and all of a sudden you see additional content being created on those new domains in terms of replication of websites or somewhere for you to enter in your credentials or something like that. You might start to see some suspicious activity as well if you look at your DNS trends. If you start to see lots and lots of activity from a particular device or across your network, then it's identifying that something malicious is going on, and perhaps you've got something like a botnet or something across your network. And then last of all, data theft as well. So DNS can also be used to extract data from your network in a very clever way. As the video said earlier, DNS is often kind of just left open through firewalls, isn't really reviewed as a kind of cyber security threat. But attackers know that. They know that it hasn't been secured very well over the last 36 years, and therefore they can use that to extract data within DNS requests themselves. And we're also starting to see certain types of information being hidden within that DNS traffic as well. So that's another area that's a threat, but you can also identify that if you're reviewing the DNS traffic as well.
Okay, so this is really quite fascinating stuff, actually. The amount of information that you can actually see within the DNS layer is pretty rich, actually, in terms of that kind of overall cyber posture. So, given that there's quite a lot of information that can be seen within the DNS layer, and that all networks are utilizing DNS as a way of communicating, it's something that every organization, whether it's a business or whether it's anything else, is using that DNS layer. So the video touched on the fact that it's still overlooked, or often overlooked, as part of the security stack. So why is that?
I think largely because, as we said earlier, there is so much data there, and it's very difficult to interpret unless you've got a specific tool that allows you to do that, that's going to call out that important information. Just going through DNS logs is no fun for anyone. It's certainly not going to be the first thing on your list to do when you get up in the morning and go and do your job if you're a SOC operator or whatever job you've got.
Well, you speak for yourself, Steve.
Yeah, some people think of fun in different ways, don't they, Stuart? But that's certainly not my idea of fun. So if you've got a specific tool that, one, is going to bring that information into a format that's actually readable, but two, is going to bring out the most important information for you there, lots and lots of DNS traffic is going to be absolutely fine. It's going to be genuine calls out to domains that are there for good business reasons and for genuine activity. But a small part of it may be malicious. So bringing out that small part, identifying those small things that the indicators you might have some kind of compromise or breach in your network is really, really important. And you need a specific tool to help you do that, really. I think the other thing as well is that a lot of the cybersecurity solutions can really give you a kind of high rate of false positives. And that's something you can't afford to do at the DNS layer, really, because a lot of your critical business solutions and applications are going to be reliant on DNS to actually make those content, access that content and give you that content back for your users, particularly in the world we see today of kind of remote networking and things like that. So having a low rate of false positives is really, really important. And that's where that machine learning comes in to help identify what's genuine, what's malicious, and use that machine learning to learn what's good and what's bad is really, really important. Unless you've got those machine learning algorithms absolutely specified to a T, you can find yourself in real trouble.
And yeah, I think it's a key point, really. I mean, I was a bit flippant on it earlier around spending your time looking at the DNS logs, but the reality is that because DNS is being used all the time, in fact, between networks and for them to communicate properly, then there's potentially billions of data packets from the DNS that need some kind of analysis. So without those machine learning techniques, it really is that kind of classic needle in the haystack stuff. So yeah, it's absolutely fascinating stuff. So really appreciate you giving us an oversight on that. What I'd like to do is turn that over to the audience as well, if there's any questions from the audience that they'd like to chip in. So Kerry, has anything come in?
Yes, thank you, Stuart. We've got a couple of good questions, and then we've got one pet peeve as well, which I would share with you, but we will do the questions first. So we have one that comes in from Jim saying, it's very interesting what you're saying about DNS. Are you suggesting that it could replace endpoint protection?
Good question, Steve. What's your thoughts?
No, it's definitely an additional tool that you would use. I mean, you're always going to want to have some kind of endpoint protection as well on your devices. That's kind of one of the key things that you absolutely must have in your cybersecurity stack. What we're talking about here is an additional layer of cybersecurity stack. And Stuart mentioned earlier around the way that networks are kind of changing, particularly in the world we see ourselves today, where it may not always be possible for your endpoints to go back through your traditional security stack. So VPN back into your network, through the corporate firewall, and out back into the out onto the internet. That may not always be possible now. So DNS, because it is ubiquitous, means that if you can secure your endpoints to the DNS resolver and have your DNS doing some of that analysis and the blocking there, that means that you've got an additional layer of security that you wouldn't have had if they were going just directly out to the internet. So what we're talking about is a different layer of security on top of something like an endpoint.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. Hope that answers your question, Jim. And then we've just had one in from Abdul that says, what is the impact of DNS over HTTPS?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. And for those of you in the audience who are unfamiliar with that piece, then that's a change to the protocol, isn't it, Steve, around kind of providing that extra layer of privacy so that you're encrypting that DNS traffic so that nobody can kind of break in to intercept what that message might be. So surely that's a good thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that has had much debate around DOH. We mentioned earlier that DNS has been around since the internet was created and hasn't really changed since then. And it's only now that people are starting to think about how can we secure that DNS traffic. So previously, it's been out in the open. If you're a wireless hotspot, for example, in a coffee shop, then the chances are that that coffee shop can see your DNS requests and therefore can see all the websites you're trying to access. What DOH does is secure the information from the point of your device to the DNS resolver, so it can't be caught in between. Now, obviously, that's great from a privacy perspective, but can cause issues from both a security perspective and perhaps for things like content filtering as well. Now, all of the organisations involved with creating these standards are aware of this and are offering different solutions, both in terms of the content, so allowing things like a canary domain to be created where DOH gets turned off for certain types of environments where content filtering is really important. But also, we think of it from a security perspective as actually, we can provide that additional security for organizations. So by having DOH on the resolver, from our perspective, we can ensure that your data is protected from your endpoints to our DNS resolvers, protecting you wherever you are on the internet. And again, where we find ourselves working remotely, working from different locations, that's really, really important. So it can be used for good, as well as, I know there's a lot of concerns about it, but actually, if you fix it right in your security stack and you implement it right, like many things, it could actually be used as a way of securing the data.
And actually, that's a really good point to pick up on, because there is sometimes a kind of a mixing of privacy being the same as security, and those two things actually can be quite distinctly different. So it's good to be able to kind of have the awareness of that, and some of the perhaps unintended consequences of those changes to the protocol can be addressed if you're kind of eyes wide open about it. So that's good insight. So I appreciate that, Steve. Anything else, Kerry?
Well, we've just got the pet peeve that came in. It's actually come in from Gary Foote, who is actually our guest on the show this coming Friday, and CIO of the Haas Formula One team. So Gary is saying that he was in such a rush to come out to listen to us go live on the air today that he forgot to put the heating on in his office, and he's actually sat there wrapped up in a coat, absolutely freezing cold. So top tip, Gary, make sure you put the heating on Friday so you can be on form.
Well, I'm also honoured that he was rushing to tune in to us as well. So I appreciate that, Gary, and I very much look forward to having a chat with you on Friday for our Fun Friday as well. So thank you very much for that. Thank you for the questions today. Thank you also, Steve, giving us a kind of more of a deep dive on DNS and how it plays quite a fundamental role, not just in the operation of networks generally, but also how it can provide that insight into security. So we're almost at the end of today's webcast, but beforehand, I'd like to hand back to Kerry to give us a bit of a wash up of today's cyber news. So back to you, Kerry.
Great, thanks, Stuart. Yep, some really interesting stories in the news today. So the first one is that the BBC actually reporting that House Party, that well-known social networking app, has actually offered a $1 million reward for the person who can prove that the app was a victim of a commercial smear campaign. This comes after rumours that downloading the app has led to other services such as Netflix and Spotify being hacked. ZDNet, reports that the FBI has resent an alert about supply chain attacks for the third time in 3 months. This one focuses on state-sponsored attackers using Campier's malware to attack supply chains, specifically drawing attention to attacks on healthcare companies. Security Boulevard reports that cybersecurity for the cloud is likely to accelerate as everyone is forced to work from home. As more data is sent to the cloud, security teams will have a bigger job to try and secure that, and they're obviously working from home themselves. So they believe that this will lead to a broader adoption of cloud security tools to keep everybody safe. You may also have seen that our very own, Nominet's very own Eleanor Bradley was in the Telegraph this morning, following her interview talking about fraudulent domains relating to COVID-19. So Ellie is actually on the show with us this time next week on Tech Tuesday to give us more details on what Nominet has been up to. So don't miss that show. And then finally, today is World Backup Day. Happy World Backup Day, everyone. Conveniently ahead of April Fool's Day tomorrow. But in a world of ransomware, DDoS, and so many other threats, Stuart, why don't you take some time out to make sure that you're fully backed up?
Very good advice, and I think it's advice we should all heed in terms of making sure we are adequately backed up. Interesting, some of those reports coming through today. Obviously, House Party is quite topical. It just kind of reinforces, I guess, it's all too easy for misinformation or hearsay to gather apace. So it's an interesting response that the makers of House Party have made around this bounty. Maybe they're really confident about their security, or maybe they're looking for the root cause and if there is any challenges there. I guess the only other thing that kind of sparked me just then was thinking about that the healthcare industry being an attack vector right now. It's pretty sad to think that right now we're trying to counter a pandemic, but there's also, there seems to be an intensifying of some of this kind of cyber criminal activity. It's pretty sad. It's perhaps a bit of a stark reminder, actually, that cybercrime is far from a victimless crime. Good roundup of the news there. Appreciate that, Kerry. Do remember that it is World Backup Day today, so make sure all of your important files are backed up. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you also for Steve giving us that deep dive in terms of Tech Tuesdays around the importance of DNS, and thank you for your questions and also the pet peeve. So again, apologies, Gary, that we seem to be the cause of that pet peeve, but I guess the lesson is there to keep your heating on nice and low overnight, and it shouldn't be so cold when you get in there tomorrow. That's about it for us today, except to say tomorrow is Security Begins Here. We're joined by special guest Gary Hibbard, who's director at Cyberfort. So look forward to talking to him around his approaches and his views on cloud security. So until then, thank you all for joining in, or if you're listening to us on demand, thank you very much for downloading our webcast today. See you all back here tomorrow. Until then, have a good rest of your days. Don't forget to bookmark this page here, and we'll speak to you again soon. Thanks then, everyone. Bye-bye.